Asymmetrical Haircuts Justice Update with Janet Anderson and Stephanie van den Berg.
Hi everyone, this is Janet, and a shout out to Steph, who's usually be saying that she can't be here today, but instead we have our producer Margherita Capacci. Hi Margherita.
Hi everyone. Hi Janet, nice to be here.
So Margherita's been covering the Kosovo Specialist Chambers for the last few years, and because that doesn't get all the attention it could or maybe should, we thought that we would focus in on a couple of major developments there that will have a big impact back home in Kosovo and are also really important for anyone who's actually following international criminal justice developments. So, Margherita, I am now going to force you into the basic Stephopedia stuff. You've got to give us a summary. Over to you.
The Kosovo Specialist Chambers was set up in 2015, and it is formally part of the Kosovo judicial system, but it is located in the Netherlands, in The Hague, and it is fully staffed with internationals. And that was done especially outside of Kosovo because of worries over witness protection in the Balkan country. So until now, we've had 6 cases at the Special Chambers, 3 for war crimes, another 3 for obstruction to the administration of justice, or, as we know it, alleged witness interference. And so far we've had 2 final judgments in the Salim Mustafa and Peter Shala cases, and both were convicted for war crimes.
Okay, but the biggest case, the one that has most international attention certainly, which is about war crimes and crimes against humanity, what's been going on there?
So you're talking about the case for Hashim Taci and 3 other co-defendants, and that trial started in April 2023 and is being really quite huge because it had 130 plus witnesses testifying over the course of over 220 days of hearings. And on top of that, also other written statements by other witnesses. So it's been very, very long and quite rich.
Yeah, I know that it's going to be impossible, therefore, to actually summarize that trial via one little podcast, especially as we are going to try and shoehorn quite a few other issues in. But let's just name who's who there. They've written down as I meant to say them, but I believe that you're the person who should say who they are, Margherita, because they're Kosovo names and you've been practicing, haven't you? Go ahead. Who have we?
Practicing is the strong word, but let's have been hearing them a lot, yeah. And so the 4 men on trial are Hashim Taci, Kadri Veseli, Recep Selimi, and Jakub Krasniqi. And they're charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity, and those include persecution, illegal detention, torture, and murder.
So these men, all 4 of them are men, they're all high-ranking figures in the KLA, which is the Kosovo Liberation Army. And they all went on from there to become prominent Kosovo politicians. Thaci, of course, is the best known name out of all of those because he was Prime Minister and Foreign Minister and then President, and those were roles that he played in the newly independent Kosovo between 2008 and 2020. And he was president of the country when he resigned and actually came to The Hague to defend himself before the court and has been staying essentially in Scheveningen in the detention unit since then. But Margherita, why don't you just give us a quick summary of what the prosecution has been arguing in this huge case?
So the prosecution argued that the Kosovo Liberation Army, the KLA, had a chain of command, and all of the accused bear individual and command responsibility for the charges. And the charges also cover the murders of more than 100 people and the abuse of hundreds more in around 50 detention camps in Kosovo and northern Albania.
And when are we talking about? When was all this meant to have happened? It was decades ago?
Yeah, over 25 years ago now. And the period of the charges is between March 1998 and through to September 1999. And all of this happened in the context of the 98 and 99 ethnic Albanian War of Independence from Serbia. And Serbia at the time was, with Milosevic, was ruling over Kosovo. The war ended with a 78-day campaign of NATO airstrikes against Serbia.
Yeah, that managed to help finish off the fighting and set the path towards the independence of Kosovo. I am finding more and more that war crimes trials are about periods that most people, even people listening to this podcast, might not actually have been alive in. And of course, I was alive then because I'm ancient. What about you, Margarita? Were you around and conscious of Kosovo while it was happening?
I was about 1 to 2 year old.
Okay, well, then I don't think that you were probably paying much attention. Okay, so let's just dive into this specific case. So the way we're going to do this podcast is we're going to play some clips, a few bits from the prosecution and a bit from the defence, just a flavour of the final arguments that they were coming up with. Then we're going to move on to another case, which has also just recently started. That's the witness interference case. It was a big one, which also started this month. And then we're going to pull out a bit more of a helicopter view and get the view from Kosovans themselves about the court, which is always such a big debate. As you can only imagine, I mean, it's a court that's in The Hague, that's about Kosovo, and there are no Kosovans on the staff. So, you know, it's a really interesting sort of example of justice. So kick us off, Margarita.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover. So let's start with the specialist prosecutor, Kimberly West. And the war crime trial came to closing statements in February, and she gave a summary when addressing the judges at the start of the closing statements on February 9th.
This case is about the four accused' goal to gain and exercise control over all of Kosovo. But this determination for power had something standing in the way. That is, people who were deemed to be opponents, those who were or were perceived to be collaborating with Serbian forces or officials or state institutions, or not supporting the aims or means of the KLA and later the PGOK. This often included people associated with the LDK and persons of Serb and Roma ethnicities. And in order to achieve their goal, the accused committed crimes against their perceived opponents to take control over Kosovo. Your Honors heard the testimony of the prosecution witnesses called in this case. They included many KLA witnesses, other Kosovars from all different walks of life, numerous victims of varying ethnicities and their family members, and some internationals who were present in Kosovo in 1998 and 99. The evidence of all the witnesses, as well as the documentary, video, and forensic evidence presented, reveals that these crimes were committed and that the accused bear legal responsibility for them.
And the prosecutor also made it clear that she felt that she was really speaking on behalf of victims. She really thinks that the court is pursuing these cases on their behalves. And she mentioned the massive uphill struggle that she says it has been to kind of both bring the case, maintain the case, and keep the witnesses protected.
I save my eternal gratitude for those who deserve it the most, for those who have personally taken it upon their own shoulders to ensure that the rule of law is delivered to the people of Kosovo. That is, those victims and witnesses who have come to this court to give their testimony. And despite fears, threats, and stigma being forced upon witnesses and their families by a limited but vocal group in Kosovo, these witnesses have so yearned for the truth to come out that they nonetheless chose to cooperate with my office and give evidence to this court.
And also in this trial, prosecutor Kimberly West made a direct link to alleged witness interference. And that's a trial that we will come back to in just a moment.
Unfortunately, this trial did not escape the long-standing and pervasive climate of intimidation that had been forecasted from the start. To the extent the court must consider it to make a fair assessment of witness reliability, it should. Indeed, the evidence before you suggests that at least some of these efforts took place right here in The Hague. Still, the court has before it overwhelming evidence that, for example, the accused were key members of the KLA General Staff well before November 1998, and evidence that the zone commanders took orders from the accused and not the other way around. Clear efforts made to change, dilute, or otherwise influence certain testimony, in particular to the accused Hashim Thaci's benefit, have been uncovered.
Okay, we've heard some of what the prosecution wanted to say. What about the defense? Can you summarize their arguments, Margarita?
So yeah, during the closing statements, all of the four defense teams also presented their cases. And on the very last day, the accused also took the stand and got their chance to speak to the judges and to the public. And I wrote about both the prosecution arguments and the defense arguments for Justice Info. So you can read more about that if you're interested. And we will put a link to the articles in the show notes.
Yeah, but let's just be clear. Basically, the defense, they denied all the charges, all the variety of charges that their clients were being charged with. I think there were quite some interesting different arguments. I think a lot would come down to what I would call command responsibility, sort of whether these particular individuals can be held responsible for the actions of the people on the ground. But what would you say if you had to summarize it?
Yeah, no, I think that's really the point, the key point here. All defense lawyers, they denied any criminal conduct. They also said that the prosecutor failed to bring enough evidence to show that they were responsible for the criminal conduct. But yeah, most of all, they did argue that the KLA was not structured enough for them to have control over the subordinate. And also they did argue that there were other people in charge who had more of a decision-making role. And yeah, as the prosecution said, that one of the key points, of course, of the allegations is that they were part of this joint criminal enterprise. And the defense said that there was no criminal enterprise. They were not trying to take control over Kosovo for themselves, but what they were doing was trying to fight against Milosevic for the freedom of Kosovo. And here you can hear Thaci's lawyer, Luka Mizetic, say some words from the closing statements.
There are too many holes in the prosecution case, too many internal inconsistencies, too many illogical arguments, too many unanswered questions, too many international witnesses telling you that Hashim Thaci is not guilty, too many insider witnesses telling you the same thing, too many documents that are missing, such as illegal orders from Mr. Thaci or proof that he was authoring communiques, if the prosecution's theory were true. No connection between Hashim Thaci and any criminal conduct. This nearly 3-year trial was a test of the prosecution, and the prosecution has failed. Mr. Thaci's presumption of innocence remains. It is time for Hashim Thaci to go home. We ask that you enter a judgment of acquittal.
So you were there, Margarita, for some of these key times that the prosecution and the defense were wrapping up their cases. What was it like behind the scenes?
Yeah, it was actually really interesting. The closing statements went on from February 9th to the 18th, and I was there for 3 of the days. So for the prosecution, the defense, and when the accused spoke. And it was always quite busy compared to how busy it usually was in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's empty usually. The times that I've been there, it was just me and anybody else I'm taking along. So it was full.
It was full. And yeah, actually on the very last day, so when the accused were meant to speak, I sat on the very last free spot in the public gallery.
Oh, you're always on time, Margarita. Always on time.
Yeah, well, they weren't going to speak until the afternoon, so I took it a bit easier that morning. But yeah, it was packed. And outside of the court, there were more people trying to enter. And one of them had this T-shirt with the KLA symbol. And there were also lots of media from Kosovo. And they were doing live shows for their TVs and for their newspapers the whole time. So there seemed to be a lot of attention for it in Kosovo, of course. There were also embassies from The Hague, of course, like the Albanian embassy and the Kosovo embassies, but also other people watching and lots of family members of the 4 accused. And yeah, I do have to say that you could feel the tension, especially when the time came for Thaci and the other 3 to take the word. When they entered the courtroom, everyone kind of stood up and pressed on to like wave at them. And then the moment they started speaking, it was that quiet, and you could see people like, ticking with their feet and shedding a tear and being quite tense and quite a little bit emotional. At least that's the feeling I got.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is that they were obviously addressing the court because that's what they're there for. But this is people back home hearing from these men who they haven't heard from directly for such a long time. So they were speaking also, essentially to Kosovo and telling them that, this is my position. This is what I've got to say.
Yeah, also that hearing came the day after Kosovo independence. Kosovo celebrated its independence on the 17th of February. So it was also charged in that sense. The court had to take a 1-day break in the hearings because of that. Decided to take the 1-day break. And you could hear that they were and they are politicians. So they were very secure in what they were saying. And yeah, they were speaking, they were looking at the judges, but they were speaking to all of Kosovars. That's how it felt.
So when should we expect a verdict in this mammoth case? I'm sorry, I keep on using the term mammoth and big and gigantic. I don't know how else to describe it.
Well, so I said that the closing arguments ended on February 18th, and from then the judges have 90 days to issue a verdict, but they could also ask for an extension. So let's say they have at least 90 days.
So that's March, April, May, so maybe sometime in June. That would be the earliest unless they ask for an extension. Okay. So we're going to kind of put that trial a little bit to one side, and now we're going to look at witness interference. You said that there were 3 cases going on, but there's one major one I think we're going to focus on. But it is incredible that half of the cases at the Kosovo Specialist Chambers are about witness interference. And the thing that struck me about these cases just in general is that this is all about why the Kosovo Specialist Chambers were set up, was to try to avoid witness interference. And it's because of alleged interference in what happened in the Yugoslav tribunal trials and how the European Union work, I think that was called ULEX, even though I've never looked at it in detail, how that happened. So this is why we've got this Kosovo Specialist Chambers and the Special Prosecutor's Office in The Hague, and we've got the full staff of non-Kosovans. So it's really at the heart of the matter. So why don't you give us a quick summary on intimidation or interference or obstruction of justice cases as a whole? What's been going on?
Yeah, so like we said, there have been 3 obstruction of justice cases at the court, and 2 of them have already ended. And one was quite a few years ago, so the men who were convicted have already served their sentences. And actually one of them, I've seen him on multiple occasions in the public gallery of the main war crime trial.
I don't understand that, Margarita. You mean that somebody who's served their sentence, presumably in The Hague, in the defence unit, because it was too short a sentence to go anywhere else, is now attending court?
Well, yeah, he's free, and so he's following the case from the public gallery.
Have you asked him what he thinks about what's going on?
I have not. I think I missed my chance there.
Well, I find that a really interesting kind of set of circumstances. I don't know what to make of it. So that's one.
Yeah, then there was another one, and all 3 men pleaded guilty. I think that was in 2024. So 2 of them are still serving their sentences, and one of them is also already out. And so there is only one case still ongoing for administration of justice.
Okay, so this is, again, a relatively larger case, I think, than the other two that you've just run through quickly. Tell us more about this one. Who is now being indicted here for what?
Yeah, so the remaining case involve Hashim Tachi again. And in November 2024, the pretrial chamber of the court confirmed the indictment against, again, Tachi for criminal offenses against the administration of justice. And is charged along with the former chief of the Kosovo Intelligence Agency. And here I might butcher some names because I haven't heard them that many times. Bashkim Zmakai and former Malisheva mayor Izni Kilai and former KLA member Fadil Fazliu and the former Minister of Justice Haiderin Kuchi.
And what exactly are they, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 men, including Thatchi, which obviously makes this a very interesting trial? What are they all being accused of doing?
So, according to the indictment, between April and November 2023, during separate unprivileged visits, so the privileged visits are mainly with the lawyers, so unprivileged ones are with everyone else, basically. Not just the lawyers, but let's summarize it like that. So during unprivileged visits to the detention unit, Hashim Tachi provided Zmakai, Kilai, Fazliu, and Kuchi, so the other 4, with confidential information about prosecution witnesses and instructed them to influence the testimonies of these prosecution witnesses. And is also accused of providing details about how to do so how to influence these people. And the indictment also alleges that Tachi coordinated 3 groups consisting of the other 4 accused and other people who were not charged, with the aim of interfering with testimonies of witnesses called by the prosecution in the main war crimes trial. And for example, and this is of course one of the most notable examples, the prosecution said that Tachi provided details on how the former KLA chief of staff, Bislim Zirapi, should testify. And Zirapi was a prosecution witness, and he was key in both the prosecution and the defense cases and arguments. We've heard his name many times.
So this really cuts back to what we were saying about the main arguments on both sides with the prosecution and defense in the main war crimes against humanity trial, which is that saying who was responsible, who was in the chain of command, who said what to whom, who can be held responsible for these things. And Zirapi is a key figure in all that. So I understand that they opened this additional interference with witnesses trial at the end of February, and they had some statements between February the 27th and March the 5th. Were you there for this one as well?
I was not there, I have to admit, but I did do my due diligence, I did do my research, so...
That's okay, Margarita. We can't always be all the time in court. I mean, I'm speaking as somebody here who's away in Vilnius a lot of the time. I'm not there, I have to do things from a distance, can't be there every single day. So what's your summary of what's happened so far?
Yeah, so all 5 accused pleaded not guilty again. They had already, of course, pleaded not guilty before, but this was the actual opening of the trial, so they pleaded not guilty again. And as we are recording now, the defense team still have a couple more days. So we are recording on March 20th. They have until Monday, the 23rd, to say whether they want to seek a dismissal of charges or not. And if they do, they have until March 25th to file the relevant motions. And then they can decide to present a case. And if that happens, that will be in April.
Okay, so let's hear also another quick snapshot from the start of this trial. And here she is again. It's the specialist prosecutor, Kimberly West.
Hashim Tachi is charged with repeatedly and systematically attempting to interfere without witness testimony and with violating multiple court orders aimed at protecting confidential witness information. His co-accused are charged with unlawfully participating in these crimes. The conduct of the accused strikes at the very heart of the rule of law and this court itself, which exists within the Kosovo judicial system, to ensure independent and fair and secure proceedings. That is why we are here. Whether the accused were successful in their efforts to influence witnesses does not matter. The reason we committed resources to this case is to protect the integrity of the proceedings in Case 6 and to ensure that the world and the Kosovo public understand that anyone who attempts to intervene in the truthful testimony of any witness we put before this court will be held to account.
Okay, well, we caught up also with Ardit Kika, who's a journalist at Koha Vision TV, and it was really nice to speak to him again. He's been following the court really closely. I've met him before in the Balkans. We were doing a media literacy project, which we were both part of, and I've seen him at different times over the last couple of years as he's visited The Hague. And he explained what he thinks of it all and why it is specifically that we had this very curious line from the prosecution that they said, it doesn't really matter whether the attempt to influence things came off or not and whether it actually influenced the trial or not. That's not the real point.
Ardit works for Koa Media, and they published quite a long piece on the opening of this trial, and we will also link to that in the show notes.
One interesting thing is that I also read the trial brief of Thochi's defense, and there was a very nice argument there that the prosecution didn't go where it wanted, didn't reach what it wanted. The prosecution in this case, it's also the biggest case for meddling with the administration of justice. They probably wanted to prosecute intimidation, and they didn't end up doing it, but it's attempted interference with witnesses, basically. The prosecution didn't find any evidence that Thochi was part or ordered the intimidation of witnesses. They only found evidence that he tried to influence witnesses, but only the attempt is charged, and there is no charges that he tried to scare them, to pay them, or anything, whilst there are other people who were convicted for scaring witnesses, for promising to pay them money, and so on. And some of the people who were sentenced even admitted of their guilt. And for now, according to what we see in the trial briefs, what they did is the legal wiretapping for months. It seems like they got some material, but yeah, you can hear what's whispered there and the thoughts she said that, for example, to tell a witness to emerge as a hero after his hearing in court and to improve certain parts of his testimony before coming to court, because the KSC has this system where the witness of the prosecution can meet the prosecutor before his testimony and make adjustments and correct some parts of their testimony they gave in the past.
And we also asked Ardit what else caught his eye while following this new interference trial, because as we know from similar procedures at the International Criminal Court, which I followed, via these kind of trials, we actually get some details of the conditions of life inside the detention unit. We get to understand how the defendants are managing to prepare their defense, for example. And then we also get some information about how the prosecutor's office operates, because it's the one doing the investigation into the allegations. And specifically, we get to know things like whose telephones they have permissions to tap, which is always interesting to know.
Yeah, what I didn't know is that Thochi had a printer in his detention center, and the prosecution alleges that he gave confidential documents to his visitors, and they were later found in the car of, for example, the former director of the intelligence agency. Another interesting aspect is that Bashkim Smokai's defense, the former head of KIA, it claims that that evidence has been planted in his core, which is quite interesting as well. In other words, it seems possible, but yeah, there has to be found evidence elsewhere except for judicial wiretapping.
Yeah, and we also asked Ardit how this trial was seen in Kosovo, so what people on the ground thought about this.
This court is really special, and we call it Gjykata Speciale, which means special court, because of the witness cases. In fact, till now, we have 10 accused brought in front of court for accusations of meddling with justice, and 6 accused for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And it's quite a special court in that sense. The reactions of people here were different. Like, some of them saw it with great surprise, because even some of my colleagues asked me, how is it possible that Thaci could be such an amateur to give instructions to his visitors in prison? This is one kind of reaction. But what else we know is that Thaci is sort of still a political factor in Kosovo. So to some other people, it wasn't a surprise, because we know that the leaders of PDK, the party which Thaci led in the past, go to him sometimes for advice in the detention center, visit him, and get political advice from there. I also met other people who just told me that the prosecutors just find some creative ways somehow to launder their failure with the big case. That's the argument, that the big case was not so strong, so they had to hit the accused twice.
Ardit also explained that to really understand these issues, you have to have a sense of the reality on the ground in Kosovo itself. I mean, the context there is it's a small country. It's just 1.6 million people, and everybody knows everybody else. It's a very warm culture, a very kind of close-knit society. People actually live close to one another. And maybe most significantly, you have to understand that those who've been accused in this case and in some of the main trials were people with very significant political and, beyond that, all kinds of power in society. So who else did we speak to apart from Ardit, Margarita?
Yeah, we also spoke to Amer Alia.
Okay, who's that, Margarita?
Amer is a criminal law attorney and is specializing in war crimes, transitional justice, and international criminal law. And since 2012, he has contributed to the Humanitarian Law Center of Kosovo. I've spoken to them in other occasions, and he has worked on high-profile war crimes cases in both local and international courts. I started by asking him how pervasive is this interfering with witnesses in Kosovo more generally.
We have 3 cases in front of Kosovo Specialist Chambers, but we have dozens of cases, let's say, in front of Kosovo courts. And the main evidence in this case is the testimony of the witnesses. During these 25 or 6 years after the war, we have sometimes like cases when they make pressure publicly to some people to testify or not to testify, but in generally the witnesses are testify without pressure in more cases in Kosovo, because we have open trials, because we have not protective measures too much in these cases, and because the closed session are not closed for the public, and we can see what is happening in every trial. But as I mentioned, in these cases, even in Kosovo, in Serbia, or in other countries, always will have the people who will try, let's say, to make pressure to any witnesses, but for that there are institutions to try to protect their life and testimony.
So Amma speaks there also about the issues that certainly you and I both encountered, Margarita, that there were a lot of closed sessions in the main trial, in the Thaçi trial, Thaçi and others. That's been a really big point of discussion at the Kosovo Specialist Chambers. And of course, we understand why there are closed sessions, which is to protect the witnesses. But it really does affect how people see the court if they can't actually follow the testimony, and it really influences whether they feel that this is a transparent trial and something that's trustworthy. So here's Amma on that.
I was following or monitor, I don't know, maybe more than 1,000 court sessions for war crimes in ANMIC and ULEX and IC2I. And what is the difference between this institution and the Kosovo Specialist Chambers? It is the cases in front of Kosovo Specialist Chambers, specific for war crime cases. These 3 cases who are in progress or to finish, we have a big reduction of witnesses, and we have a huge number of protective measures against witnesses. Like in 50% of prosecution witnesses, we as a public, as a journalist, as a lawyers, monitors, we didn't have chance to listen their testimony. So it's not a professional to give any conclusion if this trial will be this kind of judgment or this kind, because we have limited access to their testimony, and we have limited access to the material evidence who are administrated during the trial. So this is one element that it's different, because in the previous courts, let's say in Kosovo, in front of ULEX and ANMIC missions, who also deal with KLM members and other parties involved in war, we didn't have this kind of closing sessions, like or too many witnesses, protective or injured parties. But of course, a huge number of the witnesses who are protective, they give testimony in previous cases, because we can read the charges against Thaçi and others. We see that there are mentioned many detention centers and many injured parties, and this huge number of these detention centers, they were part of previous proceedings in Kosovo.
And Amma there reminds us, as I kind of skipped through sort of earlier on in the podcast, the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, KSC, isn't the only acronym around. It's really just the latest of this incredible variety of acronyms that you have when it comes to the different mechanisms for international justice to try to tackle these alleged war crimes in Kosovo. So I'm sorry we got sort of slammed with a lot of different ones there. And Amma continues here.
First of all, we have IC2I, who was established in 1993 and who finished the mandate, let's say, in 2017. And in same time with IC2I, we have international missions who investigate and judge these crimes, like war crimes in Kosovo. We have United Nations mission in Kosovo, UNMIC, from 1999 to 2008, and later we have European mission ULEX, who continue this job. So of course these cases will have connected with other institutions, because they deal with same topics, they deal with same crimes. And if you see the indictments in Thaçi and others, you will see some of the charges are connected with previous trials. For example, with trials in IC2I, with trials in Kosovo, in front of Kosovo courts, or some in front maybe of Serbian courts. So we have also local courts who deal with trials, investigation, and these topics.
So what else has been different about the Kosovo Specialist Chambers from previous setups, in his view?
In this court, we have also the victim's office or victim's lawyers who protect the interests of the injured party. And we didn't have this, let's say, in IC2I, and we didn't have in most of the cases also in Kosovo. Even in Kosovo, it's allowed to have the third party as a victims and to be active during the trial, but in some cases in Kosovo they are not representative. But in the Kosovo Special Chamber, we see that they make like obligatory to represent the interests of the victims. Third element, which is different from previous courts, it is that in Kosovo Specialist Chambers, we have, let's say, one-sided indictment. Only one part was accused, and in previous courts, we have both side cases from KLA and Serbian forces. But this is like court who deal only with the Dick Marty reports, and we see now that there are only one party who was in front of the court.
Now, of course, somewhere when we come to discussing Kosovo is going to mention the Dick Marty report, and Amma just did there. So just to remind you, that was the European Council, I think it was, investigation. It was led by Swiss politician Dick Marty, and that was the kind of kickoff. It was the way that the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, the need for it was really established, and the reason why we're here now. So, Margarita, I'm kind of wondering, we've done a lot. Are we nearing the beginning of the end, Margarita?
Yeah, the end is in sight. We're not quite there, but yeah. But we do have to, being a pod about the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, we do have to ask whether it did what it was set up for, and whether it has managed to get any step closer to justice and accountability in Kosovo.
Yeah, I think that was a good question that we should ask about all the courts and tribunals, of course. But I mean, it particularly comes alive in this particular example. And I am absolutely sure that even though we're asking this question right now, this won't be our final time of doing so. I'm sure we will be back to ask this again. But it is interesting to try and assess it for now. Now that the main trials, it feels, are coming to a close, I don't think there's any prospect of any new ones being brought forward. And now that we're really dealing with this large witness interference trial, which also has the main person involved as the person who was in the other main trial, that's Hashim Thaçi himself. So you asked, didn't you, Margarita, what did Ardit actually think about whether the KSC, the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, is really managing to deliver justice?
One important point is that the court has justified its reason to exist because of these witness cases. But it's a complete other question if it brings justice and accountability. One important aspect of the Kosovo context is that most of the crimes in Kosovo during the conflict were made by Serbian forces. And most of convicts for war crimes in Kosovo are Albanians. So that's a big contrast, and that's mostly because international community of the UN and ULEX was competent for trials until 2016, I think. So it won't feel like justice. And my impression at the end of this big trial is that the prosecution has left the how and who of the crimes unanswered. And it put the burden of these crimes upon the leading KLA figures. But you have to have in mind that the KLA was a guerrilla. It's not the same as the Yugoslav army or the MUP forces or anything else that you had in the trials of former Yugoslavia. I think that these are interconnected, knowing that the number of convicted Serbs is about 30 and the number of convicted Albanians is about 40. So this is one aspect that why Kosovo hasn't prosecuted a lot of former KLA members, although there were convictions even in Kosovo. So without addressing this and without Serbia recognizing Kosovo and cooperating with it for international crimes, for crimes against humanity and war crimes cases, there cannot be any justice for war crimes in Kosovo. That's how I see it for Kosovo, for the future, because I think that this court, they're counting their days. It doesn't have longevity, especially after they finish the big case.
And what about Amma? I mean, whether he thinks that the KSC has actually done anything for justice for Kosovo more broadly, whether he thinks that this kind of counting of numbers between the numbers of Serbians convicted and the numbers of Kosovans convicted, I don't honestly think that's the best measure of justice served, but it's an interesting measure, an interesting metric that I'm sure really plays in Kosovo. We wondered whether he also thinks that justice is really skewed.
Can this court contribute to the justice generally? I think this is only a small contribution to the justice for the victims, because if we see the number of the victims in the cases or the indictment, it's about 100 and some victims are part of these cases. But in other hands, we have about more than 10,000 civilian victims in war in Kosovo, but the criminal justice is always limited and will be limited, and we don't have perfect system to find guilty all people or all superiors who were involved in crimes in any war, even in Yugoslavia or other crimes. So in this process, I think the political will is playing a crucial role. For example, in Kosovo, we don't have a good political cooperation between Kosovo institution and Serbian institution, and this is given the time to suspect people to live free in Serbia, for example, and to not be extradited in Kosovo to be judged. And for this reason, they recently they changed the law and they start with trials in absentia. But this is they are not perfect trials. They are trials who are challenging for institution. But if we don't have political will, if we don't have political and diplomacy pressure, and we will not have success to any institution.
And Amer speaks of 10,000 victims, and I just wanted to clarify those are civilian victims of the war in Kosovo, irrespective of their ethnicity. And I also asked him, because he was very vocal, of course, in the view that criminal justice is not the only and sometimes maybe the main thing in transitional justice. So I also asked him what else is needed in Kosovo, what should happen to provide real transitional justice.
The societies, the countries in the region, they have to work in all field of transitional justice, not only in criminal justice, as I mentioned, but first of all, they have to create this regional cooperation. They have to accept the victims. They have to share the information to, let's say, to find the missing persons, to share the information, to indict other people who are involved in crimes, because it's not enough only 74 people to found guilty for thousands of victims who were killed during the war. Also, we have to cooperate in education, to work more with the youth, to not forget what happened, and to change, let's say, the curricula in the school, to not have this to learn like wrong information, but to learn what happened, and to not see the people who have the blood in their hand, to not see as heroes, but to have more louder voice for justice for victims.
And what about the idea of history making? All the times that I've dropped in to the court to try and check what's going on. And we've been there together, haven't we, Margarita, particularly with young journalists from across Europe who've been learning how to cover a war crimes trial. Often we've heard that particularly this trial to do with war crimes for Thatcher and others, that this is all about writing history from both sides.
Yeah, and rewriting history was also discussed so many times in the closing statements. The prosecution mentioned it, the defense mentioned it, of course, the opposite. And I think if not all of the accused, most of them also spoke about it when they addressed the court. And I interviewed other people outside of it. It was a point that was raised many, many times also in the closing statements.
Fascinating, isn't it, that becomes one of the major themes that you hear again and again being made. And I think it shows how important this court is in terms of how Kosovo sees itself and what it wants to say about what kind of a country it is. But is this court actually the best method for doing that? So can this court actually contribute to understanding history? So here's Amma again.
Look, the information or the judgment are the good sources for history, or one of the main sources to write the history. I think the history cannot be changed because history is not written only by few judgments which are delivered by some courts. We have many crimes and wars who never maybe start investigation and trials, but the history cannot be changed. And the narrative in Kosovo, and this what happened during the war in Kosovo, it's documented in very good way, even by NGOs and all their institutions who work in documenting, and also the trials can contribute to the history and narratives. The verdicts cannot change the narrative or the history because the verdicts are only for individual criminal responsibility.
And that just feels so true of so many of the trials that I've covered, even though they kind of absorbed huge chunks of history. They had historians testifying often. They often wrote up bits of history in their judgment and said, this is what happened. In fact, it can't be the full picture because it's always refracted in some way by the fact that it's the trial of somebody and it's about specific individuals and what's, as Amma puts it, about individual criminal responsibility. So, Margarita, this is a gargantuan to match the trial podcast. Is there anything more that we need to say?
Well, I just want to add something that I asked Amer because, well, of course, he raised many issues of this court, and every court has its own issues. And yeah, he raised many issues and many questions about whether this court can deliver and what it can deliver. So I just wanted to end asking him if there was anything more positive to also say.
The judges who are involved in these cases, they are doing their job. They will take the decision from the investment they get, and even one fact or two facts or more facts are proven by court. I think it's positive, but it's not positive to have like a one-sided court because it's not good also for the jurisprudence and for history. But we know these courts are ad hoc and they are working for some short time, and I think any judgment which is approved by credible witnesses and testimony and evidence, it's a positive.
Great. Okay. As I say, I'm sure we will be back to do a bigger, probably not longer, because this probably be one of our longer podcasts, but a bigger assessment on the KSC without all of the pesky details of exactly what happened in the trials. But we've managed to shoehorn everything in, Margarita, and I think it should be interesting to people also to understand that we as journalists are both trying to cover the trials, so we need to know the detail of what goes on in them, but we're also interested in understanding the bigger picture like this. So thank you so much, Margarita, for putting all this together. And of course, get well soon to Steph if you're listening to this where you are, and we can't wait to get you back on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Janet, for having me, and thanks everyone for listening.
Just to say that if you are enjoying this podcast and you'd like to give us a bit of extra support, you can head over to our Support Us page where you can give us a tip, or you can follow us on Patreon and you can download our newsletter. And we really appreciate everybody who gives us a bit of extra support there.
This was Asymmetrical Haircuts, your international justice podcast, created and presented by Janet Anderson and Stephanie Vandenberg, in partnership with the Hague Humanity Hub. Music is by Autonautics.com. You can find show notes and everything about the podcast on asymmetricalhaircuts.com. This show is available on every major podcast service, so please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word.